Jenny Clegg is an independent writer and researcher. She's former senior lecturer in the international studies and is a longtime China specialist. One of her more recent books is China's Global Strategy Towards a Multipolar World. And Jenny is also an activist in the peace and anti-war movements in Britain. So Jenny, please go ahead.
Thanks, Radhika. So I'm actually going to be focusing on the UN. Its principles are, of course, the bedrock of world peace, both the sovereign equality of nations and territorial integrity, and its commitment of states to maintain friendly relations and to settle disputes by peaceful means so as not to endanger international peace and security. I would agree with John that NATO should be seen as the root cause of the war, but I'm not convinced that Russia had no other choices. Its actions, as I see it, are wrong and a massive miscalculation. The question that I think we should be engaging with is what kind of a world order will emerge from this war? And this means taking a long-term view and seeing the bigger picture, including China and the question of multipolarity. So the war clearly has a dual character. There's the war between Russia and the Ukraine, and there's also a proxy war. But this proxy war is not just between NATO and Russia, but is ultimately directed at China, identified as the greatest existential threat to the US. So we've had the recent NATO summit claiming that European and Indo-Pacific security are integrally connected, and the constant parallels between Russia, Ukraine and China, Taiwan, talking about the risk of emboldening China if the West fails to stand up to Russia. So the Biden administration has recognized that China is too strong now to be beaten by the US on its own, hence the new emphasis on allies. And we can see how it's used the war to advance a Cold War style confrontation with the narrative of democracies against autocracies. The situation has been just too good to be true in getting NATO's European members and others like Japan to buckle down. So what kind of a future are the Ukrainians supposed to be fighting for, and what kind of order does the international peace movement stand for? I think that the UN Charter lies at the heart of the matter. Its principles are the result, as the Chinese would say, of much soul-searching, learning from the bitter experience of the two world wars. And the problem is the principles have not been sufficiently implemented. The UN was the outcome of the struggle, as we know, against worldwide fascism, an agreement of allies, the US, Britain, the Soviet Union, and yes, China, which had to be accepted on an equal basis in order to achieve victory in the East. For China, the UN Charter represents the basis of its status as a major world power. Under the terms agreed, China, the US, and the Soviet Union, which is also a Pacific power, were to be collectively responsible for the post-war order in the Pacific, and Taiwan was to be returned to China. This was the Yalta system of the East that never was, blocked by the Cold War. It's the root of the One China principle, and it defines China's end goal, with Taiwan's continued separation as a result of US arms and interference, exemplifying the US refusal to accept China as an equal. So the Chinese, I would say, did not fight the Japanese occupation at the cost of 15 to 20 million lives, just so that the US could decide where China's boundaries lie. Now, as I see it, this US war of democracies against autocracies is aimed at establishing a free and open, in quotes, rules-based order in which only democracies are considered legitimate. This is so as to legitimize Taiwan as an independent state and delegitimize China's claims. So we hear Western commentators on the Pelosi visit saying, oh, well, Taiwan can be seen as charting its own course closer to the West, just as Ukraine did. The biggest obstacle here is the UN, which recognizes the People's Republic of China as the only legitimate representative of China. This then is the main international contradiction, with the US-led Cold War-style democratic alliance strategy pitted against the UN order. So what about Russia? Will it return to the UN fold, withdrawing its troops and respecting Ukraine's territorial integrity? In effect, this is what it has signed up to at the BRICS summit, which included in its statement the following: "We commit to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, stress our commitment to the peaceful resolution of differences and disputes between countries through dialogue and consultation, and support all efforts conducive to the peaceful settlement of crises." Now, on multipolarity, I've heard people argue that we must defend Russia as a defense of multipolarity against US hegemony. Sure, both China and Russia seek a multipolar world, but they have very different ways of going about it. Russia repeatedly overrides the territorial integrity of others, and this creates potentially dangerous precedents for China itself seeking reunification. Of course, the relationship with Russia is important to China, and China maintains broad-based relations, but its assistance in the war is limited. It abstained, i.e. stopped short of supporting Russia in the UN vote deploring the action and calling for the withdrawal of troops. And it maintains relations with Ukraine and has given some aid. With both Russia and Europe weakening, the focus is shifting more broadly to the BRICS. These constitute only 25% of the world GDP, but in the next 10 years or 15 years, maybe this might be 40%, maybe challenging the G7. Multipolarity is about shifting the balance of power, but it's not just about power. It's also about the kind of order states create collectively to promote this shift through border development, which in turn requires peace and stability. Poles of power that are based on self-interest alone are bound to conflict. China has not stood aside in the war. In fact, it has taken an extremely important initiative, the Global Security Initiative. This aims to counter the new Cold War style world confrontation. It opposes military blocs and fake multilateralism. It rejects war and sanctions in favor of peaceful dialogue. It reaffirms UN principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, balanced together with the call for respect of security concerns of others. This is the concept of indivisible security, that one country should not seek to achieve its own security at the cost of another's. In conclusion, whilst calling for a ceasefire in negotiations to end the Ukraine war, the left also needs to ask itself what kind of world order will emerge from the Ukraine war. It needs to grasp how the US aims to build a new international order strong enough to resist China's reunification, and that the fight before us has been over 70 years in the making, the fight for the UN order. The left needs to stand by the One China principle and build a peace movement united in calling for indivisible and common security, so as once and for all to embed the principles of the UN Charter deep into the fabric of the international system. And in this, it needs to join with climate change activists and those fighting for equality and economic and social justice. I'll finish there.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.